Everyone deals with pressure, whether it's school, work, relationships, or just life in general. We've all felt it at some point. And usually we find ways to manage it. Some talk to a friend, some go for a walk, some just try to sleep it off and hope tomorrow feels a little easier. But sometimes that pressure builds, it doesn't let up. And when someone feels trapped, when they believe there's no way out, they might make a choice that no one could ever see coming. This is a story about that kind of pressure, the kind that pushed a teenage boy to the edge and beyond. What happened in this case shocked Malaysia. A 17-year-old boy, not just accused of murder, but of killing the very people who raised and loved him. This is the murder of Vernita Boone and Jarek Lim Boon Kai. It was June 12, 2025, just past sunrise in Bukit Rumbay, Malaysia, when police received a call that would lead them to one of the most disturbing crime scenes they'd seen in years. Inside the house, two bodies, a woman and a young man presumed to be her son, were found lying in pools of blood. A third victim, the youngest son, just 13 years old, was found alive, barely. He had severe injuries and was struggling to breathe. Outside the house, officers found a 17-year-old boy sitting alone, dazed, quiet. He wasn't crying, just staring. At first, police assumed he was a survivor. Maybe he had just come home and walked in on a robbery gone wrong. That's what he told them, that he had spent the night out, and when he got home, he found his mother and brother already dead. It sounded plausible, at least at first. But things changed quickly once investigators pulled the CCTV footage from the house. What they saw turned the entire case on its head. There was no robbery. Instead, the footage showed the boy himself holding a knife and stabbing his own mother and brother again and again. The youngest brother had tried to run but didn't get far. And suddenly, the quiet boy outside wasn't a victim anymore. He was the prime suspect. When the news broke, the country was stunned. How could something like this happen? What could make a teenager turn on his own family? To understand that, you need to know who the victims were. The mother, Vernita Boon Yen, was 51 years old, a teacher at a local school for Chinese Malaysian children. She wasn't just good at her job, she was respected, loved, even admired by many of her students. She spent extra time with kids who needed help. She handed out small rewards to those who worked hard and improved. She believed every child had the potential to shine, and she did everything in her power to help them get there. In 2008, she even received the Excellent Service Award from the Seremban District Education Office, recognition of her dedication, her passion, and her impact. As a mother, Vernita loved all three of her sons, and from the outside, it looked like they loved her back just as deeply. There was Jarek, the eldest at 21, then A, the middle child, 17 years old, and finally the youngest B, only 13. By most accounts, the house was filled with warmth, laughter over meals, trips as a family, photos filled with smiles. And Vernita's husband, Lim Kiat Long, was part of that stability. He wasn't just her partner, he was her support system, always by her side. If she had a rough day at school, he was the one she'd talk to. If she brought work home, he'd sit with her while she graded papers. But that all changed on January 6, 2025. That day, Lim passed away unexpectedly at the age of 54. And just like that, everything shifted. The loss was devastating. Vernita wasn't just grieving her husband. She was now left to carry the entire family on her own. No more shared responsibilities, no more shared weight. It was all on her. She had to go back to work while still mourning. And every time she looked at her students, young, full of potential, she was reminded of her own children. What would happen to their futures now that it was only her? She felt the pressure mount. It was heavy, but she buried it. She kept going. But the grief turned into something else, something darker. Guilt, fear, frustration, and eventually control. She started pushing her children harder than ever before. No more time for games, no more excuses. They had to succeed because she had no room for failure. All of it was rooted in love, but to her children, it might not have always felt that way. And yet, Jarek, the eldest, never complained. He always smiled through the pressure, always answered with a soft, "Yes, Mom." He was calm, thoughtful, the kind of son who'd do anything to make his mother proud. On Mother's Day, he made her a tribute video, a simple, loving gesture that brought her to tears. In that moment, she might have believed she wasn't alone after all, that even without her husband, her boys would always be there for her. But what she didn't see, or maybe didn't want to see, was that not all her sons coped the same way. The middle child, was different. Now, middle children are often called the forgotten ones, the ones caught between the responsibilities of the oldest and the innocence of the youngest. But A was anything but forgotten. He was loved, adored even. Vernita made his favorite dishes, gave him what he asked for. But with that love came expectation, a heavy, unspoken kind of expectation. Where Jarek saw his mother's demands as a challenge to rise up to, a way to show love back, A saw them differently. To him, they weren't goals, they were walls. And with each passing day, they felt higher, tighter, like there was no way out. Like her other sons, Vernita expected the best from A, not just good grades, but the best he could possibly reach. Every subject, every exam, every semester, he had to push past his own limits. There was no such thing as enough, and to Vernita, it wasn't cruelty, it was preparation. She believed high school was when a child's future took shape, and she wanted her son to have the brightest one possible. By all accounts, A wasn't a failing student. He was quiet, yes, often kept to himself, but polite. If someone said hello, he'd smile, and his grades were not bad at all. Some would even say impressive. But apparently, that wasn't enough. After school, while other kids relaxed or played games, A was told to sit down and study. Don't waste time, Vernita would say. Think of your future. And A tried. He did what he was told. He studied, he pushed, he kept going. But pressure doesn't affect everyone the same way. Not every child is built to handle that weight in silence. He had his own dreams, a vision for his life that didn't quite line up with the blueprint his mother had drawn. And when he tried to explain that to her, tried to speak up about the pressure, the stress, his mental state, she didn't take it well. She scolded him harder, told him he was being weak, that he needed to focus. So A turned to someone he trusted, his older brother, Jarek. But that conversation didn't go the way he hoped either. Instead of acting as a bridge, someone who could help the mother understand what A was going through, Jarek allegedly dismissed the concerns, told him to listen to Mom, study harder. At that moment, A might have felt truly alone. The one person he thought might understand didn't. And then came the breaking point. It was exam season. The SPM, Malaysia's National High School exam, was right around the corner. Vernita doubled down, harder studying, higher expectations. Break your own record, she told him over and over. The words echoed in his head. And finally, something snapped. That night, June 11th, they fought, a serious argument, the kind that leaves cracks. A told her how he really felt, that he had his own way of chasing his future, that he couldn't do it this way anymore. But instead of a resolution, things escalated. Allegedly, Vernita kicked A out of the house. Alone, outside, with nowhere to go, A made a decision, one that would change everything. In his mind, the only way to end the pressure was to remove its source. It's believed that A had bought a 20-centimeter folding knife several days earlier. Maybe he'd thought about this before. Maybe not seriously, but now the plan was clear. In the early morning hours of June 12, around 5 a.m., A returned home. He didn't knock. He didn't call. He crept in quietly, slipping through the door while the house was still dark. Inside, his mother was asleep on the living room couch. He stood there for a moment, watching her sleep, the face he'd known his whole life. Peaceful, calm, nothing like how she looked when she was angry or yelling. And for just a moment, he hesitated. Maybe he could just talk to her again. Maybe this wasn't the way. But then all the memories came rushing back. The shouting, the pressure, the loneliness, the feeling of being invisible. And with that weight in his chest, A pulled out the knife from his bag. His hands were shaking. Then, with the same hands that once held hers as a child, he began stabbing again and again in the neck, chest, as if he wasn't killing his mother, but years of suffocating pressure she'd placed on him. And he didn't cry, not then. Because in his mind, this wasn't about hate, it was about escape. The sound of the attack wasn't loud enough to wake the neighbors, but inside the house, it echoed through the silence. Jarek, the eldest, heard it first. He stirred from sleep, confused, maybe half awake, and stepped out of his room to check. He didn't expect to walk into a nightmare. There in the living room, he saw his younger brother, A, covered in blood, standing over their mother's motionless body, a knife in his hand. For a second, maybe Jarek froze, tried to make sense of what he was seeing, but there wasn't time. Before he could scream, before he could even take a step back, A turned on him. Jarek tried to defend himself, but it was too late. The attack was frenzied, sharp, and desperate. A stabbed his own brother, the same brother who had always smiled and told him to just listen to Mom. He stabbed him in the chest, the back, the neck, blow after blow. Jarek eventually collapsed in the same living room where their mother had fallen just minutes before. He died trying to protect himself, never knowing why this was happening. And then there was one more. 13-year-old B, the youngest, had also woken up, still groggy, probably thinking the sounds were just part of a bad dream. But when he walked into the room, it turned real, fast. His brother was holding a knife. His mother and Jarek weren't moving. A saw him. Their eyes met. And in that split second, something flickered in A. He told B to run, told him not to tell anyone. But B didn't run. Maybe he froze. Maybe he thought it was a nightmare he'd wake up from. So A came toward him, the knife still dripping. He attacked the youngest, just as he had the others. But B was small, quick. Somehow he slipped out of A's grip. He didn't make it far though, just enough to break free before collapsing. He fainted before he could escape the house. And A, he thought B was dead too. Everything went still. 3 bodies, 1 weapon, silence. For the first time that morning, A let himself breathe, and then reality began to creep in. He looked around the living room at the blood, the stillness, the horror of what he had done. The memories hit him like a flood. Family dinners, laughter, homework, that Mother's Day video, all of it still fresh in the walls around him. But it was gone. He couldn't take any of it back. So A moved fast. He wiped the knife, stuffed it back into his school bag, took off his blood-stained clothes, tossed them into the bushes outside, threw on something clean. Then he walked outside and sat down, just like a boy waiting for the school bus. And when he was ready, he made a call. He didn't call the police. He called a friend and told him the house had been robbed, that his family had been attacked. By the time officers from the Batang Tiga police station arrived around 6 a.m., the scene was quiet again. They found a teenage boy outside, sitting alone, eyes empty, staring at the front door, not moving, not speaking. The officers split up. One team approached the boy, tried to ask questions gently. Another team went into the house. Inside, they found a young boy, still breathing, but barely, covered in blood. They called an ambulance and rushed him to the hospital. And then they entered the living room. There, they found the bodies of Vernita and Jarek. Both had died where they fell. The wounds were brutal. Their eyes were still open, as if they had died mid-thought, mid-fear. The officers immediately started treating the scene like a robbery gone wrong. But as they moved through the house, nothing seemed to be missing. No signs of forced entry, no stolen electronics, no cash taken. Outside the house, officers continued speaking to A, the boy they still believed to be the lone surviving victim. His story was calm and simple. He said he had spent the night out and had just returned that morning to pick up his youngest brother for school. That's when, according to him, he found the gruesome scene, his mother and brother lying lifeless in the living room. At first glance, it sounded believable. His voice didn't shake. He wasn't panicked, just numb. But inside the house, something wasn't adding up. There were no signs of forced entry, nothing stolen, no overturned drawers, no struggle from outside. Everything pointed away from a robbery. And then came the CCTV footage. One camera caught him, the same teenage boy who was sitting outside wearing blood-stained clothes, a knife in his hand, calm, focused. The same footage later showed him walking outside and tossing his bloody clothes into the bushes nearby. This wasn't just a tragic case. This was premeditated murder. Officers quietly placed A into custody. Back at the station, they sat him down and started asking questions. It didn't take long before he broke. He admitted everything. He said it was the pressure, the endless scolding, the impossible expectations. What his mother called encouragement, it felt more like suffocation. He didn't try to blame her outright, but his words painted a clear picture. A boy who had been carrying years of emotional weight alone. And when he finally reached his limit, the only solution he saw was to make it stop completely. Investigators ran full checks on A. Toxicology reports came back clean. No drugs, no alcohol, nothing to suggest he was intoxicated or impaired. He was fully aware of what he was doing. When the media caught wind of the story, the country was shaken, not just by the brutality, but by the sadness of it all. This was a family that, on the outside, looked close, loving like any other. Soon, Vernita's old Facebook posts began resurfacing. One showed her writing lovingly about her sons. "If mom and dad weren't in this world anymore," she wrote, "please keep loving each other." Reading it now, it felt like a cruel twist of fate. People began to ask hard questions. How does a loving mother, an award-winning teacher, someone who spent her life lifting up students, end up being the target of her own child's fury? How does a boy, quiet, polite, seemingly obedient, choose to kill the two people who loved him most? In online forums, the discussion grew. Some sympathized with A, pointing to how in many Asian families, especially in competitive school environments, pressure is constant, that the weight of expectation can crush a child, especially one caught between an obedient older sibling and a still innocent younger one. Others saw Vernita's side, a widow, left alone with 3 boys, still grieving her husband, and doing what she thought was best. Trying to raise them into good men so they wouldn't struggle the way she did. It was a tragedy with no easy villain, just people, all of them, pushed beyond their breaking points. The police have officially classified the case as murder. With a 17-year-old's confession and supporting CCTV evidence, the investigation is, for now, considered closed in terms of identifying the perpetrator. The boy is currently in custody and has been charged with 2 counts of murder under Section 302 of Malaysia's Penal Code, which covers premeditated murder. So at this point, the legal process is still ongoing. Authorities have not ruled out the possibility that mental health may have played a role in the case. That consideration could affect the outcome, whether the boy will face jail time, mandatory psychological treatment, or other legal consequences. Due to his age, his name and identity remain protected under Malaysia's juvenile laws. His face has not been made public. Meanwhile, the school where Vernita had worked held a memorial the day after news of the incident broke. Colleagues and students gathered to pay their respects to a teacher many described as committed, disciplined, and deeply involved in her students' development. Though the attack is over and the suspect identified, the case itself is far from concluded. There will be court proceedings, hearings, and assessments before a final judgment is made. In the meantime, the case has sparked discussion across the country, and not just about violence, but about the expectations placed on young people. Especially in high-pressure environments where academic performance and future success are emphasized heavily, many are beginning to ask whether enough is being done to support teenagers mentally and emotionally. We may never fully understand what was going through A's mind in the days and hours leading up to the murders, but this case reminds us again, sometimes the signs of distress are quiet and easily missed. At the end of the day, this was a tragedy with no winners. 2 lives were lost, a mother and son, and a family that once seemed whole was destroyed in a single morning. Cases like this remind us that behind every report and headline, there are deeper layers of personal struggle, family dynamics, and pressure that builds quietly over time. But make no mistake, no amount of pressure justifies violence. No hardship makes murder acceptable. There were other paths, other ways this could have ended. So instead of taking sides, perhaps the more important question is this: how do we recognize and address pressure before it spirals out of control? In schools, in homes, in ourselves. Let us know your thoughts in the comments, not just about the case, but about how we can create space for honest, healthy dialogue before tragedies like this happen again. That is all for today. Thanks for watching.